All right, everybody, welcome to 2025. This is exciting. New beginnings, new starts. Let's do this thing. So, yesterday, I was scrolling through Instagram, okay, and I noticed a post by Brandon Turner, previous host of Bigger Pockets, very well known in the real estate community, and he reposted something that David Greene had mentioned about rental cash flow. And it was a very controversial subject. A lot of people were putting stuff in the comments. A lot of people liked it. A lot of people super disagreed. And it's something that I feel very passionate about because I've been living it for the last 19 years. And David, I know, feels just as passionately as I do about it. So today we're going to dive into this theory behind David Greene and his philosophy about rental properties and cash flowing. Okay. I think it's really, really important. And I also, too, we dove into some of the comments. And there was one comment that really stuck out in my mind as to the mindset of the majority of the people and why we feel like maybe you need to shift the narrative. So you don't want to mess this. Let's get this thing started. 2025. Let's go. Clark Lunt here with David Shaw. Welcome everybody to Burn Your Boats Wealth 2025, the first edition of the new year. This is an exciting time. And today, David, we've got some interesting things to talk about.
You know what? Welcome to 2025, everybody. It's going to be more. We're going to talk about goal setting and various aspects of real estate here for the next hour. But if you bought a house and you meet your realtor outside, and you're cutting a bow with an oversized scissors, and there's a bottle of champagne waiting for you on a countertop, you've just paid retail for that house.
Yeah.
Right? If you want a deal, you're buying a house that is going to, quite frankly, disgust you.
Yeah.
And if it disgusts you, it's probably disgusted most other people away. And therefore, there's a great inefficiency in its pricing, right? And so you're buying problems. And those problems are where the profit are. It's in life. We make money when we solve problems for people. Look at Jeff Bezos. I hated going to the shops. I hated going to the mall. I hated, like, where do I buy that little finickety thing that I don't even know the name for it, let alone what store to go get it in. Now I get it on Amazon. Jeff Bezos has fixed a lot of problems,
Yeah,
a
he
lot of
does.
inefficiencies for all of us, right? And so when we go out and we buy a house, we buy it. So this thing, it's a duplex property, triple A location. I get it as an absolute screamer of a deal. But guess what? I have to inherit 2 tenants. And it will never cease to amaze me how, and it's going to sound sad, and I'm not celebrating it, how low people can fall in their lives, right? Just how they can let their lives, slip and slip to the point where I come along. They probably haven't paid rent in months.
Yeah.
Even their landlord doesn't even know what to do. Just psycho stuff happening all over the place. I did cash for keys this morning, right? It's like 9 o'clock now, right? So at 6:25 this morning, I did a cash for keys deal with this lady and her mom, and it's super sad. It's super sad. I don't know where they're going, but I know that I gave them $1,500 this morning. But the essence of real estate is often, that's her story. That's super sad. But guess what? There was junk all outside her place, up and down the street. They're really ruining the neighborhood, like absolutely ruining the neighborhood. And I would imagine the neighbors this morning are like, thank you for, getting that tree that had fallen on the house, getting that off the house, like over the weekend, getting a new roof in there, getting these, quite frankly, these junkies out of the property. So all their 3-wheeler bikes and their smokers and their, all of that stuff is gone this morning. And so, that was and this is the first day back at work in 2025. So it's off to a bang, Clark.
Just so everyone knows, cash for keys is basically like, instead of going through an eviction process, because they're always going to tell you what you want to hear, but then say, hey, I can't do it. I can't meet this deadline. A lot of times it's just a lot easier to just try and give them, depending on your market, I'll give you X amount cash. If it's in California, it's probably 10,000. If it's in a small town in America, it's probably $500 or something like that, just for context. But today, David, we saw an interesting quote. I believe it was Brandon Turner's page. I've probably screenshotted it 4 or 5 times. There's always been a debate as to, do properties cash flow? Is it worth it? Where do you buy? You'll see all these different podcasts that say, hey, these are the emerging markets, right? Here are the markets that you should actually cash flow in. Should you buy in a top, a top tier market, or should you buy in kind of a second tier market or a third tier, right? And so that's the big debate. And it's gone on before this podcast, and we're certainly not going to solve every answer on this podcast. It'll go on well after that. But I want to give you a story to kind of lead into this, because I think it's kind of interesting. You're dealing with your tenants, having to buy them out. I've got a rental I bought in 2017, I think, kind of a C-class area of Tampa. It's still a C-class area. I don't think it's improved one bit. And I inherited Section 8 tenants, and they kind of just stayed there. I didn't have to do a lot to fix it up. They were kind of fine with it as long as I passed the Section 8 inspections. And about 3 or 4 months ago, they just stopped paying. And they just decided not to pay anymore, right? And so I think I paid like 40 or 45 grand for it. So you can see that tells about the age of the property when I bought it, right? It's probably worth $150 now, $175, maybe 200 if I spruce it up a little bit. They stopped paying. I had a plumbing issue that we had to shut the water off because I have to go in and do fairly large plumbing renovation, $4,000 or $5,000 worth of plumbing repairs. Well, I stopped. I said, I'm not going to go in and spend $5,000 while you're not paying me rent. And so now we're at a standoff. So we're evicting them, right? The attorneys, I've turned it over to my property management company. And, a lot of people will say, well, Clark, you bought this property for 40, 45 grand. And now guess what it's making, David? I'm getting $1,800 a month, Section 8 rent. So 2/3 of that rent is basically guaranteed from the local housing authority. And you're like, well, that's a home run. You paid 40 grand for it and you're getting 1,800. Yet now I'm in a situation where it's really not a home run, because the neighborhood is stuck in, 1997, and it hasn't gentrified one iota since then. And so I'm faced with these new challenges. So that's what we're going to talk about today, because there was such an interesting quote that David Greene came up with. And it's my favorite quote when people talk about quote unquote cash flow. And I'm going to read it for you, David. So he said, cash flow is a defensive metric. It is not designed to make you money. I'm going to repeat that. It is not designed to make you money or give you financial freedom. Okay. The sole purpose of cash flow is to ensure the security of your property long enough to generate you wealth. Okay. And this kind of goes counterintuitive to so much you see on podcasts, on YouTube, on Instagram, on TikTok, Twitter, whatever it may be, because ironically, David, the number one question when you have an asset that you're selling as a quote unquote business, as a rental business, how much does it cash flow, right? That's the number one question. It's not what type of market is it in, what type of appreciation does it have, how close is it to the A-class schools, is it an apartment, is it a condo, is it a trailer? It's how much does it cash flow. Yet David Greene says, that's not the question you should answer. So that's what we're going to talk about today, David. When you read that and you saw all the different comments, I mean, people have all these different opinions as to if that's true, if it's not true. Everyone's going to obviously give their own personal example of why cash flow is real or cash flow is not real. So what was your take on it when you first read that? How did you feel?
Well, I think this is one of the most. I feel like we're on the TV show Mythbusters here right now. We're like, we're going to like, is cash flow important? Is it not? Like, can you live your life off real estate cash flow, or can you not? And I've been on the phone with a couple of thousand people over the years who come to me with a varying degree of what cash flow is. And so for some people, they would come to us and say, I want to leave my job, and so I'm going to start buying rentals. Okay. And that's interesting. Because a lot of people, they think that their W-2 job is all take home pay. And so let's say you earn $200,000 out of W-2. Let's just say, that's just picking a number out of the sky. About a third of that is going to go on taxes. Okay. And about a third of that, at least, is going to go on your living expenses, right? And then about a third of that is going to go on, if you're lucky, investable free cash at the end of the year. So a W-2 job does three things: pays your taxes, pays your living expenses, and pays, hopefully, for you to invest. Would agree with that? That's fair enough. That's
Yep.
how it breaks down. And that's what is that, like about, let's say, $70,000 per share, right? So 70 taxes, 70 in living expenses, and 70 in your ability to save. Okay. Well, real estate kind of does the same thing in that it offsets your taxes simply because you own it, right? So let's say that's 70 grand in tax offsets, right? Can you make 70 grand in cash flow to pay your expenses? That's the next question, right? And then because you own real estate, you are invested. So you are that other investable 70 grand, you're invested. So I've always said a real estate portfolio can kind of act like a W-2 job, but it has to be in scale. It has to be at the right size for that to happen. So David's quote, cash flow is a defensive metric. It's not designed to make you money or give you financial freedom. The only purpose of cash flow is to ensure the security of your property long enough to generate wealth. But what we're going to do for the next 20 minutes is we're going to take a little walk through the comments that flowed from this conversation. And the reason we're bringing it up is that I commented quite independently and separately from you. I didn't know you were, yesterday was, NFL day or whatever it was,
Right.
So I didn't know you were commenting, and yet I saw that you had commented on it. And indeed, our good friend Kathy Fetke commented on it. And let's start off with her comment on it. Kathy says, well, it depends, right? Is the purpose of buying rentals to live off cash flow? Like, let's say that's the question, right? And Kathy's right. Like, it depends. It depends on an awful lot. And it's a loose catch-all statement. It depends on what.
Right.
So Kathy, we need to get Kathy back on the show here to discuss that. But my take on it is that, look, I have this algorithm in my world that I use to help investors understand this, is debt by time by scale. All right. And so understand that debt gives you leverage, right? And understand how to use good debt. Understand the connection between cash flow and paying off debt. So that's why the cash flow part is so important. Cash flow does two things in a real estate portfolio. It services your debt, and it services your capital expenditure needs: repairs, maintenance, insurance, and all that kind of stuff. That's cash flow's primary job. What's left over, this bit that's left over, $200, $400 a month in the first year, or $1,000 or $2,000, cash flow comes in time with a real estate portfolio. It takes time. You do not make cash flow in the first 10 years of owning a piece of real estate, in my view. So if you're buying one or two houses to free yourself financially, you won't be free because you're not doing it in enough scale, right? And so for me, cash flow is absolutely a defensive metric first and foremost. So I'm agreeing with David, right? I'm agreeing that cash flow is not going to free you to leave your W-2 job probably for 15 years at all. And that's assuming that you buy enough property, that you take on enough debt, that you have a long enough horizon, as in you're looking at this as a 10 or 15 year thing at least, and then you have enough scale. So you've bought enough of them. One house ain't going to do it. One duplex ain't going to do it. One quadplex ain't going to do it. So I'm agreeing with David to a point, because at a certain point, 10 or 15 years on, cash flow then does start to get significant enough for you to potentially leave your W-2 job. So my comment initially was that ownership time is more important than cash flow. When you're looking at day one, you're thinking about buying a property, so many people are so hyper focused on day one, or what cash flow is today. What's the cash flow? What's the cash flow? And I'm not looking at that. I'm looking at the bigger ball of wax. Is it, if it's $400 a month of positive cash flow or $400 a month of negative cash flow? Guess what, Clark? It doesn't matter, because at the end of the year, when you put all of your numbers into a ball of wax, when you go to your tax advisor, you go to your accountant, do you say, okay, give me all of your books, give me all the cash flow you got brought in, give me all of the mortgage interest that you paid, give me your W-2 information, give me any of your real estate professional information, give me your expenses, give me your, your home office deductions, give me your child deductions. So your cash flow just falls into all of this. And so to look at a piece of property as just one standalone thing and say, oh, it cash flows or it doesn't, unless you're including depreciation or cost segregations, unless you're including those things as well, you don't know if you're cash flowing or not. Most people actually don't know that they're cash flowing or not. That would be my thing. In day one, most people don't know it. But for me, Clark, I agree completely that debt by time by scale 100% depends on and sits atop the fact that you have a tenant that pays you rent, and that rent first and foremost covers your debts, secondly covers your maintenance, and whatever is left over, it could go into reserves, or go into buying your next property. And if you really, really need it, it can go into paying some living expenses. But buying a real estate portfolio will not free you from your job. You need to make your money elsewhere. That's core. Make your money elsewhere. And if you do buy real estate, buy really good quality real estate that's going to appreciate. Clark, you've just mentioned your property appreciated from 45,000 to 200,000. Sounds like good appreciation, but
it's not going to change anything in my life in any large amount, right? And I think that, we did kind of our last episode, we did kind of like a review of 2024, and 2024 is our first year, doing this podcast. So we got a chance to interview a lot of really high quality people. And when we interview these people that are very, very successful, the common theme that I saw amongst everybody is they worked their ass off, David. There was no cheat code. There was no shortcut. There was no like, oh, I'm going to work a couple hours from the beach, but I'm just going to be smarter than everyone. Everyone had to fail forward, right? They made mistakes. They cost them money. It cost them stress. It probably cost them relationships. And so I say that for a reason. And the reason why I say that is that when you hear this slogan, like you said, I want to buy X amount of houses to replace my W-2 income. Here's what they're really saying. I want to take my active income that is stressful. I have to go to an office. I have to listen to a manager. I have to work on Saturdays sometimes when I don't want to work. I have to work 9 to 5. I have to ask off. I have to raise my hand when I want to take a vacation. I want to replace that where I make active income. I am able to pay for my family. I'm able to pay for, buy that car or that boat or whatever it is. I want to take that effort that I'm putting in. Okay. I don't want to do that effort anymore. I want to do this passive thing over here, but get the same results. How many times in life have you worked your ass off and achieved great things and then being like, okay, I'm not going to work my ass off, but I'm going to achieve the exact same results? I don't know about you, but that doesn't happen very often, right? So when I hear that, that's like, I want to replace my stressful job that I work my ass off, that I'm really good at, and do something that's really passive where I work, 3-4 hours a day, if depending on the size of your portfolio. It could be 3-4 hours a month if you only have a few, but I want to get the same results. That's just not how like it works. It doesn't, and I haven't seen it. And of course there's going to be outliers where they do get to do that and it works for them. But I'm talking to the 99% of the people listening to this that you have to work hard to make money. You have to think, you have to take some risks, things like that. So I want to be clear that if you just think that you're going to replace your income and it's just going to be with passive actions, passive risks taking, passive sacrifice, right? Where, you miss your kid's soccer game because you had to work hard. Well, you're probably not going to have to miss your kid's soccer game to buy that, but you're not having to sacrifice. You're not having to risk quite as much. And in tune, you don't get compensated as much as your active income, right? So I know that what I have seen through 18, 19 years of investing now, I bought my first property right out of college in 2006. And I know that I haven't been able to financially free myself strictly from cash flow, right? So that's why I commented on David Greene's thing. I totally agree. Now, there's an assumption when that's said, David, that I think most people that are commenting, that are listening to these podcasts, they're not looking to buy 1,000 apartments next month. They're not looking to buy, 150,000 square feet of self storage, right? They're not looking to buy 9 trailer parks. That is because they are looking at it as like, I have my job, or I want to learn how to get into real estate. Usually it's flipping houses or wholesaling or buying a few rentals. So ultimately, I think that comment is speaking to the 99% of people that are looking to do it as kind of like a side hustle that could turn into a full-time job, but it probably hasn't yet, right? Me and you both have real estate, okay? Yes, it cash flows. It's taken me, it probably took me 15 years before I really started to see any decent cash flow coming in on a consistent basis, right? What happens is, though, is that it's not like you become ambitious enough, right? Like you're ambitious, I'm ambitious. Probably you listening this on this podcast right now are ambitious. You want to keep growing, right? You're not going to be ambitious for like 4.5 years and then be like, all right, I'm good. I'm not going to be ambitious anymore. I don't care about growing or getting ahead. So what happens is that a lot of times as you start to create this cash flow, quote unquote, you want, that tenant moves out, you need to put in that new kitchen. You need to update those things that you may not have done when you first bought the property because you thought that the tenant didn't care. Well, guess what? The new tenant is going to care, right? This is a competitive environment. You have to have your property stand out. It has to be well maintained. And that well maintained and updated costs money. So now you're taking some of that cash flow, if not all of it, and putting it back into that property. So the thing that I feel very, very strongly about is because I've just seen it over my time of 18, 19 years buying and investing in real estate, is that it's not financially freeing me just based off the cash flow. And I want to continue to have nicer properties. I want to continue to add properties, right? And I'm not going to do that by just sitting around and continuing to let these properties run in the ground. So you have to keep them up. You have to be able to, when the tenant moves out, you need to look at it and say, how could I make this property a little bit nicer, which will attract a little bit nicer tenant, which means they may stay here for longer, which means they may treat the property better, which means my property manager will be happier because they're not having to field as many phone calls about, late payments and, being loud in the neighborhood and things like that. It's a trickle down effect, right? And so you learn that, but it takes time, as you said, right? It takes time to be able to have these properties perform, see how well they work, how well they don't work. So to kind of just round that out is that I 100% agree with it. The only thing that I would differ in is if you are that person that's buying 200 apartment doors, 500 apartment doors, well, then now you're running a full-time business. Like you're running a business. So now we're getting out of that kind of passivity and you're getting more into something that you are kind of getting closer back to that 9 to 5 that you have because of the fact that it just takes more time, more effort, more experience, be able to really truly understand balance sheets and profit and loss statements and trailing 12s, which then gets you out of the passivity, which is what you thought you were getting into in the first place. I'm going to end this, David, with there's no such thing as a free lunch and there are no shortcuts in life.
So what I'm hearing you just say, so the idea of cash flow when you're buying houses, if you're listening to this and you're kind of starting out or even you're well into your journey, because I had a conversation with a very, very experienced real estate investor the other day on a text chain. We were just bantering to and forth. This is a guy who has a lot of real estate, right? And he was complaining that, with the higher cost of insurance, higher cost of maintenance, the higher cost of just everything, and that rents haven't been increasing quite as much as he wanted to. And he was complaining that there was no cash flow. He's like really questioning if real estate was even the right business model for him, right? Now, I can understand that completely. Do you know why? Because he was probably 72. When you're 72, you're not really all that concerned per se, as a generalization, about future value. He was buying real estate today. He was accumulating real estate at this latter stage of his life. He had moved into real estate late in the game. And so he's basically started a significant real estate portfolio in his 70s, looking for that real estate portfolio to throw off significant cash flow for him. Now, in his defense, he buys mostly without debt. So he is making cash flow, probably 5.5%, 6% on his money, right? So he is making some money, but he's unimpressed with his returns. And he was asking me what my thoughts were. And, I responded to him is that, well, I don't invest in real estate for cash flow. And anybody who knows me knows that I've said this a few times before, that I have a separate real estate bank account, that all my expenses get taken out from that bank account and all my rents go into it. And they've done so for, a decade or more, right? More, right? And how many times I've put my greasy personal paws into that real estate bank account to take out money for vacations or my own lifestyle at all is zero. I have 0 times taken money out in probably 18 years or longer that I've taken money out of that bank account for my personal use. So the bottom line, and I'm saying this now as a declaration, cash flow for me is not part of my reasoning. And I'm talking about cash flow today. It will become very important later in my life, right? But cash flow today is not what I use to live and eat, pay my health insurance, and send my kids to school and put gas in a car. That's not, I don't use real estate cash flow for those things. Why I own real estate is simply this. I own real estate because I'm paying off mortgages at scale, right? I've got a fair few $1 million worth of debt, right? That debt is being paid off a little bit every single month, right? Get paid off on my sleep, and it will continue to get paid off in 2025 and 2026 and so on and so forth until my debt will be whittled down and whittled down and whittled down by 2 things: by the tenants paying off my mortgages and by the US government printing more dollars. And every time the US government prints more dollars, and they're printing bajillions of them, right, they create a certain amount of inflation. And the bigger my real estate portfolio is, this essentially over time, the smaller your debt looks. I remember looking at my debt a while back, a couple of years ago, and it was like at 2.8 million or something like that. I remember thinking, wow, that's a huge number. And here I am, like 5 or 6, 7 years later, 2.8 million, just, it's not the same 2.8 million as it used to be. And I'm not saying that 2.8 million is not a shit ton of money. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying it's not. Now, when I look at the overall valuation of the portfolio, it's very manageable. And what keeps me sleeping at night is when I look at my debt, right? And it's all fixed debt, right? And then I see what my income is. My real job, in order to create that wealth, and to continue to harness and harvest that wealth, is back to David's point, right? Rule number 1 of servicing debt is having good, high cash flow properties, right, that pay my mortgages. And to your point, exactly, allows me to go in there and replace my HVAC, replace my roofs, and clean out. These are not expenses that I hate. If you're having an emotional reaction to replacing an air conditioner or whatever, I strongly recommend you go back and listen to our episode on the psychological bullets of real estate, right? Go and understand that every time you put a HVAC into your property, you're investing in your property. Real estate isn't something you put your 20 grand down and you never have to spend money again. You will. You're going to have to bring more money to the table from time to time, right? But the reason I buy real estate, and the reason I'm down there meeting, junkies at 6:45 in the morning, is because I'm getting a lot of equity when I buy this house. So, I bought this place for $359. I'm going to spend about 110 on it, so I'll be in it for like 470, thereabouts, right? But it'll be worth probably a little bit more than 700,000. So there's my equity. But, you cannot eat equity, right? I can't go to the store and buy groceries with equity or with net worth. And that was the following comment. After your comment, my comment, and Kathy's comment, a commenter came in and said, you can't buy groceries with net worth. And my response was, yeah, you can't buy groceries, but you can buy a grocery store when you release $1 million in a tax-free refinance. It's the waiting part that most investors cannot handle. It's not one or the other. It's a blended approach where you earn elsewhere, be it W-2 or do some other hustle that pays your groceries and pays your stuff today, right? But owning assets, right? So it's a blended approach, earn elsewhere and offset the taxes and build life altering wealth in the background, then refinance later in the day for anything you need in your life when you have significant equity. And so what that means is that as you're building up a real estate portfolio, it's appreciating, your debt's going down, but then you have this store of value. And that store of value, when it's 40 grand or 50 grand, you can't really get to it. And that's the point. If you could get to it, it would weaken it. The fact that real estate locks up value and it's hard to get your hands on it, right? Really is what it's that it defers any gratification for the longest time. But trust me when I tell you this. One day, you're going to lump 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 of your houses together. You're going to go out because your rents are way higher now. You might not need the cash flow for something. You're going to go down and do a refi, and you're going to walk out of the bank with $700,000 or $1 million, tax free. It's all very uneventful, and you can do whatever you want with it, right? Because now the new tenants in the nice new houses that you've maintained and you kept them up and running can support a much higher loan. And so real estate investors don't wait to sell per se, they wait to refinance. But what people, when they're starting out on this journey, don't understand is the wait. You have to put money aside, you have to buy a property, you have to go through a bunch of bullshit over the years with these people, right? They're tenants and repairs and this, that, and the other. And then one day in the future, your 50, 60, $70,000 deposit that you put down is now $1 million property that you owe nothing on whatsoever. And lots of people listening to this have experienced that. So what do you say about that? So you can't eat equity, Clark, but it's the weight that people can't handle. Talk to me about that.
So I'm looking at, and that was my favorite comment of the whole thread. There was 30 or 40 comments, right? And this guy says, you can't buy groceries with net worth. And I love your comment about, yeah, but you can buy the damn grocery store, right? And that is a bigger picture. But I want to add some context. I think the guy wrote, you can't buy groceries with net worth. 48 people were like, hell yeah. They liked it and said, you can't wave around a profit and loss statement at Winn-Dixie and trade that in for $100 worth of groceries, right? And you wrote this really well thought out, hey, but you can buy the grocery store, but it takes delayed gratification. It takes you doing some things, dealing with lots of tenants, blah, 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 right? Well, David, that's not as much fun. I like being able to buy my groceries today, right? Yeah, pie in the sky, buy the grocery store thing. Your comment your well thought out, got 4 likes. He got 48 likes. So we have to ask ourselves is why did so many people say, you can't buy groceries with net worth? Well, we need to shift the narrative, David. We need to shift the narrative. When you're buying rental properties, don't think you're not supposed to be buying groceries with that net worth, right? You're not supposed to be buying groceries with those 3 rentals you own. So let me give you another example. And I'm not making this political, but when everyone says, well, the person that's working at McDonald's can't afford to live in a XYZ place because they're making, $10 an hour. Well, you're not really supposed to be paying for you, your spouse, and your two kids off of a fry cook's salary at McDonald's. That's not what that's intended for, right? It's more intended for people that need summer jobs or want to kind of get their start, but you need to move up the ladder, right? So it's not intended for that. So if your mindset is, I'm buying real estate because I need to buy groceries, well, you're in the wrong game. You need to go right back to your job that enables you to buy groceries right now, right? But 48 people were like, yeah, that's right. You can't buy groceries with equity, right? And they're absolutely true, because you're asking the wrong damn question. You do not need to be saying, how do I buy groceries? Okay. You buy groceries by going to work and having your active income. And whether that's a W-2 job, or you're like we've done for a long time, flipping houses, right? Flipping houses is a job. We take a commodity, we buy something, we make it nicer, and we sell it as fast as we can, right? Does that sound similar to whatever job you work at, where you have a product that you offer and you sell it for more, right? It's no different, right? So that's why when people say, oh, I'm a real estate investor, and they say I'm a flipper, you're really not an investor. You're just buying something and trading it within 12 months to create active income. So we need to shift the narrative that if you're looking to buy groceries, you need to have an active income. If you're looking to buy the grocery store, okay, which isn't going to happen tomorrow or the next day or the next day, but it could happen sooner than you think. That is where we start thinking bigger. That is where you start having to say, okay, for me to buy the grocery store, I need to start buying rentals, right? And everyone's got a viewpoint on if you want to buy Airbnbs or boring vanilla ice cream, long-term rentals, or you want to get into self-storage, whatever that looks like, right? But everyone's going to usually start smaller. They're going to buy quote unquote less risky properties, which are usually cheaper. They're in worse areas. Hopefully you've listened to enough of our episodes to where we can kind of skip over the buying the cheap stuff in the bad neighborhoods, and at least starting in maybe the B class neighborhoods, right? So I want you to switch your narrative if you're thinking about getting into real estate or you're in it for a while. Is don't think you're going to be buying your groceries anytime soon. Don't think that you're going to be sliding that business debit card into the gas station to pay for your gas for your car, because that's not what it's intended for, and it never was intended for that. Okay, but as you keep doing it, as you keep delaying your gratification, as you keep pushing the rock up the hill, you're going to start to see the fruits of your labors. But in my case, we were talking before this, I think that it took me about 15 years of consistently buying 1 to 2 properties a year. So one year I'd buy 2 properties, the next year I'd buy 0, the next year I'd buy 3, but let's just say it averaged out to 1 or 1.5 properties per year. It took me to year 15 before I even started to see any type of meaningful cash flow. But guess what? I want to continue to keep growing it. I'm getting better at it, right? I understand it more. So I'm taking a piece of that cash flow. I'm throwing it on the next property, right? I'm taking a piece of that cash flow and replacing that old roof that the tenant keeps complaining about, but they've been a great tenant. And I want to take care of my tenants. So I want to make sure they don't have a leaky roof, and that they have a little bit nicer kitchen and granite countertops, because they take care of me and I'm going to take care of them. And that's how you stay away from becoming a slumlord, which is another episode we did, that nobody gets into this business to become a slumlord, yet you kind of can evolve into being a slumlord if you treat your rentals as just a spreadsheet and not as something that is a proper business. So that comment stuck with me, David, and 48 freaking people liked the short term. I need my drug now. I need a hit now. I don't want to wait for it. Give me the high now. I need to buy groceries today. I'm not worried about 5 years from now. David, you're not going to get wealthy by taking all the chips off the table and buying your groceries all at once.
Yeah. It's look, the masses are not on board with this conversation, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Most people, it's so much easier to hate on
Yeah.
landlords, or to hate on the whole idea, because they don't get it. They don't want to wait, or they don't have the gumption or the hard work, or you know just a vision of what real estate actually does. I want to highlight what you just said. You just said you bought one a year, and you consistently bought one a year. I would say that is a superpower, right? Because it's, not to toot my horn, but I have the same approach. I don't double or quadruple down on any one given year, or just go bonkers for like 2 years and then I do nothing, right? Throughout this entire higher interest rate environment, before it, during 2008 and 9 and 10, when everyone was hating on life, I've just consistently bought. I haven't gone nuts on any particular year. I've just been adding inventory to my personal portfolio consistently. Remember last year, Clark? We just did an episode on it. We all added a bunch of stuff last year.
Yeah.
We know the market is high.
Yeah.
We know we're not stupid. We know that cash flow is defensive. To
Yeah.
David's point, we know cash flow is defensive. So why in good God would we do something like that? First and foremost, it's because I adhere to that mantra. Dollar cost average into your real estate is always be buying, because you don't know anything about the future. So always be buying, because the government are always printing money. As long as there is more money in circulation, there's going to be ups or downs, temporary highs, temporary lows. But to David's point about rent being and cash flow being a defensive measure, if you're buying a property and that property underwrites in that the rent within reason, doesn't have to be all of it, covers all of your mortgages and some capex expenses, right? If that's about even, then you add that property to your portfolio, because I want to add the next comment that came along, and I thought this was great. So a multifamily investor came out and replied to David's comment, right? He said, I fully disagree. My properties cash flow constantly, and when you have enough scale and when there is an expense, it is covered by the others, right? And then another comment is, until you scale, cash flow gets eaten up by capex sooner or later. So I want to be very clear on those two comments. That's two comments in a row came out and said, I disagree completely. And that when you scale, so if you've got one or two or three homes, right? And, they are older homes and they don't make a lot of rent, just say, you're going to feel pretty disillusioned because you got the wrong assets in a non-appreciating market, and there's only three of them. So I've said before, debt by time by scale. The scale part is super important, because when you have 10 assets or 20 assets or 30 assets and you have an AC goes out over there, it's a rounding error. You don't really care, because the other, let's say it's 20, the other 19 all came in and brought in their cash flow this month. The other 19, they all went up in rent this month. You just mentioned about your tenant in one of your houses with the plumbing issue. Well, guess what? That sounds terrible if that was your only property.
Right.
But if you have 19 or 20 or 30 properties or 40 properties, that's just one of your things. It's just one thing. You've got to sort it out. It's not emotional whatsoever. And so it's so important what we've just talked about the last minute, which is always be dollar cost averaging or become a multifamily investor. But you need scale in order to one day get that cash flow. Because the end game of real estate, and listen to this carefully, the end game is you do get cash flow. All of your debts paid off. You've got no mortgages. You've got 30 homes, free and clear, or a 40 unit building, free and clear. You don't owe anything to anybody. You're cash flowing your backside off at that point in time, right? Right, Clark? Because you bought these things for 100 grand. They're now worth 900 grand.
Yep.
You bought these things when they're renting for $1,000. They're now renting for $10,000, right? Over a 25-year span. And now you've got no debt on them. Just when they're at their maximum pricing, and they're at the highest rents they've ever been, the highest value they've ever been, and you've got no debt on them. That's when you walk into a room and you meet a guy and he's worth $55 million. And he's got no debt whatsoever. Do you know what? I've never met a young guy in that room that has, a bunch of properties completely paid off. Never a young guy, right? It's always an older guy or lady. I don't genderize this, but it's always an older person who's sitting there because they've been through the process. And that's what this episode, or that's what this podcast is about. We're slightly older, having this conversation with you, so that if you are younger, know that it's the time that you have to spend to get to that point. Cash flow is defensive, And this, I would argue to David that his comment is a super valid in the first kind of 10 to 12 years of ownership. Cash flow is a defensive metric, but it flips. It starts to flip at around year 12, 13 and onwards, right? Especially if you have great property in a good location that it's done a lot of appreciating, right? Especially if you have a few of them. So if one goes down, you know, you need a new roof, or you want to like take one out of service for 3 months while you do some renovations, you're not all screwed up, right? So I would say, you know, the scale part of what these multifamily investors are saying is like, no, absolutely not. Cash flow is viable. It is real. You can live on it. Absolutely. You can live on cash flow when you have enough scale and you've owned them for long enough. Clark, what's the next comment, or what do you want to say?
Yeah, I like that the multifamily guy commented and said, "No, I disagree." He was like, I've scaled enough to where it does make sense, right? And so that I think that's important for everyone to understand, and it's how I feel about looking at where I'm currently at, right? With my own portfolio, me and you share a decent amount of properties together as well. Is that I feel more confident in myself because I've been doing it long enough. It doesn't get any easier. You know, you hear the saying, it doesn't get easier. You just get stronger, faster, smarter. You can make decisions quicker. You can identify opportunities better. Is that I always refer back to the penny doubling every day for 30 days. And eventually that penny is now worth, $112,000, and then it's worth 224,000. And I believe that that's how real estate works with portfolios, where let's say I have around 40 rental properties or 40 rentable units right now. I feel more confident in myself that I'm going to get to 80 quicker than I would to 45, right? So when I say that, I mean like the buying the next couple houses, like I feel more confident to go out and take larger risks and identify bigger opportunities because I bought the properties, the crappy properties, and then the slightly nicer properties. And that's one of my goals for 2025. And it's one of our goals that we have talked about at length, is to be able to go out and buy that 40 unit, to buy that 50 unit. And it's because we can identify these opportunities. But 10 years ago, I would never have bought a 50 unit. I'd be like, that's ridiculous. How do I get the money? What do I even do? How do I property manage? How much do I pay? Like where do rents need to be? How do I negotiate with tenants? But I've gone through all of those struggles now with my own C class and B class rentals, that I feel much more confident to go out and do that. So that's one of David, my big goals. And I think it's one of your big goals for this year it's time to start doubling down, right? The big question is, are you going to sit on the sideline, right? Are you going to get into the game? We've kind of sat on the sideline. We've kind of played defensive the last couple of years. We've done some building on our own properties where we can build ADUs, added a rental here and there, but not foot on the gas. And now I feel more confident to be able to go out and identify a 50 unit in my backyard that we can go and take down. And I feel very strongly about that, right? So it'll become more of an offensive metric, to the gentleman's point of view that brought that up about multifamily being, hey, look, I'm doing this in scale. The more scale that I do, the more opportunities I have to raise rent a little bit. And if I can raise rent $50 a door over a 50 unit, well, that's a big deal. If I pave the parking lot, if I, fix up the clubhouse so it looks a little bit nicer on the outside to give a higher end appearance, right? So, David, I think that we've done a good job today of really diving into what if is cash flow real? Is it just defensive? Is it offensive? We've heard a lot of different people. Hopefully you've changed your mindset a little bit about understanding that cash flow and looking at it to buy your groceries are two totally separate things. That's oil and water. So stop looking at it like that. So David, talk to us a little bit before we close up shop for the day as to where's 2025 at for you personally. Where is it for our listeners? Where can we take the advantages? Let's kind of pivot before we exit stage left here.
All right. So be very, very clear. Building a real estate portfolio, right, in the first 15 years is not about cash flow. It's about taking on as much debt as you can, quality debt, building up as many assets as you can, as many paying tenants as you can, and doing so, if I would add this, and I think this is a crucial part of it, do so in a really high growth market. I think that that's often overlooked. People chase quote unquote cash flow for cash flow's sake. And cash flow for cash flow's sake is a dead end. It's a cul-de-sac. You're just a waste of time, right? I will tell you that I have taken a reasonably high-end approach to my portfolio, and I'm thankful I did, right? So, you know, in 2025, if you're listening to this, I'm going to tell you what my goals are. In 2025, and you're thinking about, you don't like the market, you think it's, high interest rates, or you're waiting for this, or you don't like the stock market even. You're like, oh, I think the stock market is this, and you're on the sidelines in any way, shape, or form. You're just going to go to work and you're going to go into hibernation, right? Let's say that that's what you're thinking right now. Don't, right? Just don't. Because what's way more important is time. Okay, we talked about this before, and what's way more important is scale. Okay, so cash flow is defensive because it gets you through a downturn. It gets you to the point where you can build a portfolio and keep on adding to it. So if you're on the sidelines in 2023, and if you're on the sidelines in 2024, get off the sidelines, because you're wasting valuable lifetime. You have only a small window, probably realistically, when you have money. So probably maybe when you're in your mid 30s, usually till around your mid 50s, right? That's the time, the invaluable time that you have to buy assets and let them do what they do, because they work over time. You buy an S&P ETF, right? You need time for that thing to compound and do its thing. Look at Warren Buffett. He made more money last year than he did in all the years before. So stop wasting the one input that you will not get more of. You can have a year where you make a lot of cash. You can have a year where you get an inheritance. You can have a year where you get a big bonus. That's money. Money just comes, money goes, right? You can get a year where interest rates are low and everybody is gangbusters. That's a good opportunity. Sunny upsides. Why not invest? I'll invest this year, but I'm not going to invest next year because the narrative is negative. The bottom line is make 2025 a year where you get consistent dollar cost average into real estate. This is what we talk about, are stocks, are low cost ETFs, but hard assets. And so dollar cost average into that stuff. Stop reading the news. Stop listening to all the noise about why you should do something or why you shouldn't, because there's 48 people who clicked on the negative and clicked on, cash flow's crap. It's so much easier to just dismiss things, as part of the group, as part of the flock of sheep. Sure, 48 people thought that, the idea of cash flow was complete nonsense. And 3 people or 4 people liked a logical argument about the future. And that's who you are. As I've often said before, you're not going to get real estate advice off somebody who's never done real estate.
Yeah.
You're just not going to get the right advice from people like that. And so 2025 for me, and I've said this before, what I do for cash flow is I take excess, I release equity from some of my portfolio, and I lend it for much higher cash flow than renters will pay me. Renters will pay me $3,000 to stay in a $500,000 house. A flipper will pay me $5,000 a month for the use of that $500,000. There's a $2,000 spread right there. And so for cash flow, I private lend my money. That's what I do for cash flow. So for wealth, I own assets and I understand the dynamic. I buy them, I refinance them, and I sit on them. And I manage those tenants for a number of years. And then when I have equity, I'll take that equity out and I'll lend that money to people who will pay me way more money for the use of my money than the tenants will for the use of my house. I hope that's clear. And so for cash flow, I've leaned almost entirely into private lending. That's what I buy my groceries with, Clark. That's what I go on vacation with, right? That's the money I use to live my life. My future equity, if you will, is building away in the background. It's not exciting. It's not fun. It's not enjoyable. How many junkies did you pay to leave a property this morning at 6:45 a.m. while, everyone else was eating their breakfast, right? Well, I was there. And that's the stuff that, everybody wants the results of things. Everybody wants what a $30 million portfolio, but nobody wants to work. Nobody wants to do the bits in between. And that's why it's so much easier to get into a comment like that and rah, rah, rah,
Yeah.
just rip it all apart, right? So 2025, nothing major, nothing new. I'm going to keep on doing what I'm doing. First morning of 2025, I'm adding inventory. That's what I'm doing, right? And I've got to continue to find great borrowers for this excess capital that is now starting to manifest itself after years and years. So 2025, not going to reinvent the wheel. I'm going to continue to lend for cash flow. I'm just going to still continue to rent and build out houses for future value. And that's my 2025 right there. And if I'm wrong, please comment below or tell me I'm a dum-dum. But it's worked out well so far, and I'm going to continue to do it. And I'm not going to stop doing it because it's negative here, it's negative there, or the top of the market, bottom of the market, or whatever. I'm just going to continue to dollar cost average, do that safely. And I know that this process works. You just have to stick with it. And guess what, Clark? It's a little bit boring, right?
It is. It is a little bit boring. And I think that the most successful people, I've read this a lot, where the most successful people are the ones that can handle the boredom. It's like, they say that, again, I always like to go back to gym analogies where it's like the people that are the most fit, they're the ones that can go in there on the Saturday morning when not that many people are at the gym. And it's not like super exciting, but they're able to work through the boredom, which continues to make them consistent, and it continues to make them successful. So, I think this has been a good chat, David. I think we're both passionate about this. I appreciate where David Greene comes from. I think it comes from experience. I'd love to ask the 48 people that commented that said, you can't eat equity, how much equity they have, how much cash flow they have or don't have, and I think that's kind of like, a lot of times when we want to make big decisions in life, whether it's an investment, and you get all these people that give you their opinions, their fears. They're not saying it's risky for you to do it. They're saying it's risky for them to do it, which means that they're projecting those fears onto you, right? And that's a very stark difference. And that's why you need to kind of stop asking someone that's never bought real estate, is it a good idea to buy some real estate right now? Stop asking your great aunt that's rented her whole life what you should do with this 1031 exchange that you're looking to do. So I think this year I'm going to really double down. I'm going to get off the sideline. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to work weekends. I have been working more weekends recently than I have in the past. I think this is a year of opportunity, and it's like anything. Go Google real estate articles from 2009 and look what the media said. The media said real estate is dumb. It's a horrible thing. Prices are crashing. Yet that was the best time in my lifetime to buy all the real estate I could buy. It was 2009, 2010, 2011, right? And so I feel that we are coming on an opportunity potentially similar. It's not going to be the same. I think there's a lot more sophistication in the real estate investment market. There's a lot of, private equity, institutional capital that's in there buying these mom and pop single family houses. So there's a lot more sophistication. So it's a different type of opportunity, yet it's still an opportunity for this year. And don't let this year pass you by and just make excuses and say, well, I'll wait for interest rates to drop. Then I'll take action, because when the interest rates drop, now you're going to be back fighting again for every, scrapping for everything. And prices potentially could go up, or you have to give away a lot of terms. You have to make decisions quickly. You have to waive inspection periods. Now is the time to act. Now is the time to double down, to put the effort into it. Successful people work their ass off. There's no shortcuts. That's all. I'll leave with that. So David, go ahead.
I think that's great. This episode today was really supposed to kind of cap off what 2025 looks like for us. And I think that that's really, really great what you just said. Don't listen to anybody. Today is a great buying opportunity. If you're buying your first deal right now, your very, very first deal, go out there. There's killer deals that I haven't seen in a long time. Okay, there's some excess inventory out there. There's some properties that are sitting out there. Days on market are long. There's a lot of wholesalers out there that are just not getting rid of their deals just as quickly as they used to. And so, I'm getting way more active. What I don't like in the marketplace is when it's nuts. When I gotta run across town and say yes in 60 seconds and stroke a non-refundable $15,000 check just to tie a property up, that makes me super uncomfortable. Right now, I'm getting callback. I'm getting, hey, David, are you still interested in that deal? Blah, 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 blah. I'm loving it. Take advantage of 2025, guys and girls. Listen, if you're starting your first and you're getting your first deal, go out, learn how to underwrite that deal. If you don't have the money, bring that deal to somebody in real estate, or your uncle or aunt or father, or bring it to a real estate investment, a RIA meeting, but bring that good deal to somebody. You'll get it capitalized. You don't need the money. That's if you're in your first deal. If you are 4 deals in and you're stagnant and you're like, oh, interest rates are too high, I'm not going to add any more. You're running out of runway. Think about a plane taking off on a runway. At a certain point, that plane can't take off anymore because it's going to hit the ground, right? It's going to hit the wall at the end of the runway. Don't be the plane on the runway. While you have time, make sure you get deals done. It's a great time to buy real estate right now. It's a great time to add to your inventory right now. Yeah, cash flow's not great because interest rates are high. And that's why it's a great time to buy right now. And I don't have a dog in a fight. I'm not selling you anything. I'm just telling you, I'm going to pretty much double down this year as well, Clark. And I think this is a good year to get out there and buy a multifamily. I think this is a good year where the freeze, the polar vortex that's been over the real estate market for the last probably 2.5 years is starting to unfreeze. So make 2025 the year where you take care of your future by adding inventory. But 2025, is still not going to give you cash flow, but it's going to make you wealthy if you buy the right assets and you have the right attitude and you have the right timeline. And with that, Clark, I think we'll call it a day.
Let's do it. Everyone, thank you so much for listening. As always, please hit the subscribe button. Any feedback you have, if you think we're idiots and that you completely disagree, we'd love to hear from you. And with that, David, we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for listening, everyone.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. Look, we truly appreciate your support and hope you found the conversation insightful and engaging and useful. If you enjoy the show, because there's a lot of shows out there, would you please take a moment to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform? Your feedback helps us grow and reach more listeners. And if we reach more listeners, we will have bigger and more interesting guests. So don't miss the show. Please go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. We hope you enjoyed today's show. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to the Burn Your Boats podcast with Clark Lunt and David Shaw. We would love to hear from you. Please reach out at burnyourboatswealth.com with comments, questions, and if you have a topic you would like Clark and David to discuss on an upcoming episode. We would very much appreciate it if you took the time to rate and review Burn Your Boats podcast on your favorite podcast listening app, and make sure to follow and share on social media. Content in Burn Your Boats podcast is for entertainment purposes only and is not legal or financial advice. Please review our legal disclaimer at burnyourboatswealth.com. Thank you for listening.